Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we'll be taking a look at a summary of interviews that Yoshi P recently conducted with a bunch of Japanese media sites, Famitsu, GameWatch, and 4Gamer. Now the translation and the summary of the translations here are provided by MKillerB over on Reddit, so thank you to them. I will include an original link, a source link in the description, and MKillerB has provided source links to each of the Japanese sites as well. So you can make sure to go to the actual sources and support them, Reddit Karma, or, hits and all that stuff. But I haven't actually read through most of this. I've seen a few tweets here or there, so I'm reading it for the first time. So let's check it out. So first, it seems like these first few are kind of just teasers for 6.1. These are pre-live letter interviews, so most of this stuff is going to be expanded upon in the live letter, which of course we'll be doing a summary for tomorrow and posting to the YouTube channel, talking about how, Yoshi P's a Star Wars fan, so the title for 6.1 is actually kind of inspired by A New Hope. It's very direct. It's very symbolic of the direction that we're going to be going. Brought this idea to the story and localization teams, and they suggested Newfound Adventures should be the patch title. Now for 6.1, I really like that the interviewers immediately ask this. There's been a big question about if at some point the game gets so big and it's realistically not possible to expect players to play through every single expansion in sequence, if maybe 6.1 could act as like a new starting point for players somewhere down the line, so they don't have to do all those old expansions to get caught up to the newer things. And Yoshi P said, yeah, he hasn't conveyed this fully to the development team, but at a future point when they continue to develop and operate the game for a long time, it would be easy to make this a second starting point because it's just a good cutoff point. Right now, it won't happen anytime soon, and it doesn't look like it would make for a good starting off point because we're so fresh on Endwalker's finale. But at some point down the line, yes, it is very possible that 6.1 becomes the new starting point for the story. And that's pretty cool to hear. I'm curious how that'll actually end up working out, being level 15, 16, 20, and somehow jumping right into this starting point. But I don't know. Maybe it'll make sense. He says that that's part of the reason for the unending codex that they're adding, and that should help ease into those things later. Also said that the clothes in the artwork, other than the backpack, will be there. He said the backpack's actually quite difficult, so just don't expect that anytime soon because it would interfere with the weapons. Maybe they'll make it a fashion accessory at some point, and it'll hide over your weapons or something like that. So, what is the goal of this new adventure? And it's kind of just a repeat of what they've been saying so far. What is it? That is realistically the question. They can do whatever we want. Nobody's calling us and telling us what to do. We get to go be our own adventurer for the first time in the entirety of the story. So that's where we are with our early experiences. And obviously they're not going to tell us exactly where they're planning on sending us next. Also, relationships with our characters and the trust that we've built with them, they're not going to be severed. We're going to be meeting these characters, expanding upon stories that maybe have only been hinted to up to this point, and really building on the relationships that the characters have already developed. As for 6.1, why the name of the dungeon wasn't unveiled, Yoshida said he was told the name of the dungeon. He felt, is that so? He doesn't feel negatively about it, but revealing the name at this time would increase the player's expectations and create a preconception more than necessary. Yeah, I was wondering why they did that. I was like, oh man, that must be such a huge spoiler, but it's really more like we would have thought it was a huge spoiler, right? That it was like, oh, this tells us so much already just from the name alone. It must be from this civilization. He's like, no, just whatever. Just we'll hold it back. Decision not to unveil the dungeon name was actually made quite last minute when the slides for the live letter were made. So that's pretty good to know. He confirms one dungeon per patch will not change. We'll see. He says that now, but I'm not going to hold him to that forever. For future locations, we've already covered all the places they've been talking about in the story up to this point. But we haven't been to Marasidia. We haven't been to the New World. But he says very much so that the Final Fantasy XIV dev team keeps saying we need to go to Marasidia. So, to a certain extent, it would be good to anticipate it. So, at this point, while we haven't been explicitly told we're going to Marasidia, it is definitely a very likely focal point for the future. So, that's a nice little soft confirmation. Although, I am excited to go to the New World, over to the west, past, over the seas on the Limsa side of everything. I want to go over there and meet the Memel Jaws and go to Memuk and all those places. The division of Endwalker zones in the 3 instances will be reviewed after 6.1's launch. So we will still have instances after 6.1, but after that, they will review it and eventually take it away. Then they talk a little bit about expanding upon solo play, and honestly, this we don't really need to dive too much into. He's spoken about it a million times where, you know, he wants people who don't normally play MMOs to go, oh, I can still play this game. And then maybe they end up liking it and staying around, while the MMO players get something extra on top of the usual MMO trappings. So it's just really trying to broaden the game. He's already told us this a million times. Yeah, he even says they might fall in love with a character, get immersed in the story, want to know more about the world, and now all of a sudden, you know, they want to join discussions with the story with other people, and maybe they join in some boss fights, and he just thinks it's better overall. Wide appeal is better than narrow appeal. And, you know, that's in line with everything he said before. Some people are worried people who've only played solo up to now may appear in multiplayer content. I think some people are worried about low-skill players will suddenly appear. But it's natural that not everyone will catch up to the same level of understanding at first. Yeah, I've never really gotten this. I've known people who have played Final Fantasy for 7 years, and they're still not that good at the game. They just enjoy it, they have fun, they do the content that's within their interest level, and that's it, and that's fine. But then, you know, you get people who have started playing a month ago who just get it and it clicks, and they're not necessarily like great or super good, but they're trying and they're learning and they're improving and whatnot. So being new and being low skill are not always in tandem, at least not for the same period of time. So I'm never really like super big on that. So when I get into multiplayer content, I get someone who doesn't perform particularly well. For me, it's not that big a deal. And, you know, Yoshi P's kind of saying the same thing. You know, you have trust dungeons now, so if you are a player who's a little bit more self-conscious, then, you know, you'll have that option. And on top of that, you know, there's the content, a lot of the content you're grouping up for is not super difficult, so trial and erroring it and everything. It's all very simple. It's the same song and dance we've done for quite a while now. Hints at a possibility of making a soloable version of the Crystal Tower, but not until after 7.0. People did point this out, because he said, oh, we want the MSQ to be soloable. But the Crystal Tower is there. It's a 24-man raid. Obviously, it's not tough, but it is still kind of counter to the goal. I mean, there's a few things else in the story that are kind of the same way. But we might get a trustable version of the Crystal Tower sometime after 7.0. So be on the lookout for that. On the Midst of the Realm, you could say it's as close to being an epilogue to the Hydaelyn and Zodiark arc. It makes sense. I mean, the 12 has been something that has persisted all throughout Hydaelyn and Zodiark. I mean, we summoned them going from 1.0 to 2.0 in order to try and re-trap Bahamut. Louis Swa does in particular, and the Circle of Knowing. So, yeah, I mean, they are kind of a thread that's left over of that. So this being an epilogue to that really makes sense, and I think that's going to tickle a lot of people's fancies. The first raid may feel close in gameplay to Return to Ivalice. It's quite difficult. So, Hashmal memes? Oh boy, if you weren't around for Hashmal, he was a terror. He can still be a terror now, but he was an absolute terror the day that the first raid came out. So curious to see how that ends up working. For the last 5 years, checks on balance for dungeons have been done by the same team members. Tank is a casual player, the DPS is Yoshi P, and the other DPS is M-Chan, and the healer is a player with experience in extreme trial fights. But everyone ended up becoming more skilled. Recently, the job distribution has changed up. The healer became too good, so a replacement was requested. It's actually kind of interesting that for dungeons, they don't want to get 4 pros. They want to get people with mixed skill levels because that more accurately represents how the dungeon will be done by most groups. I hadn't even thought about that, so that's a nice little detail to get some insight into. On the return of Hildebrand! Explains when the team looked at the development of Hildebrand series up to Stormblood, they felt the flow of events in each story became too standardized. The development costs for the cutscenes are high, and for the developers, the atmosphere is one of making it because they have to make it, not because it's fun, and players felt the series had gotten stuck in a rut. Completely agree. There was also the problem of 14's cutscene quality and costs continually increasing. It was quite tight to make both Ivalice and Hildebrand at the same time. For these reasons, it was decided to have a break during Shadowbringers, and I think it will be a break that will be much appreciated, because I'm hoping he'll come back in force. When the hiatus was announced, the team received so many questions. When will Hildebrand come back? They were like, wow, we didn't think people really liked that guy that much, but I guess we got to continue. Fortunately or unfortunately, thanks to Hildebrand, the development team's facial animation techniques have improved. I'll say fortunately. We don't see most of those types of faces everywhere else, but I'll say fortunately. The Tataru side quest series about visiting all the characters who helped us during Endwalker and giving... Oh, I'm going to love that. That already sounds like it's way up my alley. Something we didn't have a chance to do during the main story. It would be strange for people who haven't completed the Four Lords quest to go visit them, so there will be conditions for accepting the quest. Wow, this is really going to be trying to encourage people to go back and do all the side quests they might have missed. So I actually really like this approach. Instead of making, I mean, technically you're making them mandatory to do this, but if somebody didn't feel like a motivation to do it before, this will give them a newfound motivation somewhere later down the line. The 6.1 events won't have prerequisites other than beating 6.0, but maybe 6.1 as well. But later down the line, we'll have quests in this that will require you to have done things like the Four Lords. Okay, that's good insight. I hadn't expected that. Job adjustments. Most adjustments are going to be buffs. There are a few cases where actions have been overly effective. What's been overly effective? Reaper's shield still kind of, but the other 4 DPS have really picked up. There's a few come to mind. Some of the raid buffs and the way they stack, so some of the bard buffs, some of the buffs from the melees. Red Mage has a lot of overlapping power with their defensives. We'll see. I'm curious what that ends up being. Some jobs feel will change significantly. I'm assuming that's Dark Knight. Probably Machinist also. And maybe White Mage, but Dark Knight almost for certain at that point. For example, for jobs that are difficult on controller, the number of buttons will be reduced via new settings for action substitutes. Other changes include, for action substitutes. Interesting. I wonder if that's combos, the option to chain combos together with one button. That sounds like that's what that is. But instead of making it standard, they might make it an option for people. So we'll see, because that's one of those things where if it's an option, then almost everyone's probably going to switch to it, even if they're not a huge fan of it. Other changes include shortening Dragoon's jump duration. I'd have to imagine they mean, what's a Star Diver? Like regular jump, yeah, okay, do it again. But like Star Diver really needs to have an adjustment. I hope its players are able to more easily use stiff actions like jump. These changes coming 2 weeks ahead of Ultimate might not be very welcome. It's fine. Nobody's going to complain about that, Yoshi P. The people not doing Ultimate might complain about it more. Yeah, great faith in the skill of players doing Ultimate. Exactly. You have nothing to be worried about here. The idea for Endwalker EX3 is true hope versus true despair. Can't wait to see how that pans out. There are many phases and the difficulty is perhaps close to Savage. That's why it will drop 2 totems instead of 1. Yeah, we'll see about that. They've said that a lot. But whenever Yoshi P talks about difficulty, it's usually off-kilter a little bit. This is normally a harder... Of all the extremes in an expansion, the 0.1 extreme is classically the hardest one, outside of specific mechanics, maybe griefing party finders later on. That could be due to length, that could be due to mechanics, but it is a normal thing. So he might not be that off base here. You know, like Thornton, for example, was regularly regarded as about as difficult as the first 2 Savage fights, if not a little bit more. But Shinryu isn't really regarded that way, although he might as well be, because the first 2 fights in Delta Escape were not high on the difficulty scale. So maybe it does end up working out that way. However, this tier, I think that would be impressive. Even though the first 2 fights aren't like crazy difficult, I'd hold them to a higher standard in my personal opinion. The weapons from the new Ultimate might stand out more than usual. They stand out a lot, so giant dragons all over our weapons. I'm excited for this. He'd be happy if people who aren't aiming for world first, but still want to attempt a new Ultimate, take around 4 to 5 months to complete it. Maybe, you know what? He's right on his estimate, probably, about 4 to 5 months for more casual players who are still attempting it. But when you say it out loud as the producer and director, it doesn't sound as good. So maybe wouldn't have said that. He's not worried about world firsters, but for people who prefer to take it slowly, it may take longer than T. That's frightening. For more casual players, take longer than T? It kind of makes sense because the last phase of T is not that bad, but the first 3 phases, man, really Wormhole, Nisi, and then even just doing the Yagdals. Okay, you know what? I'm going to remember this statement and we'll revisit this later. U and T were structured around solving the puzzle. There will also be an element of Dragon Song, but be closer overall to Ukop. As for length, they don't go over 20 minutes, but it's long. Yeah, it's probably about 16, 17 minutes. Initial idea was to be the Warring Triad, but with the changes coming to A Realm Reborn and Ultima getting turned into a 4-man trial, decided that Ultima Unreal... Oh, the Unreal would be one of the Warring Triad. I'm surprised at that, because it feels more like they should have gone for Ravana or they still have some of Realm Reborn ones like Ramuh or Ifrit. I guess they want to go with some of the harder hitting ones. I mean, Sephiroth would have been a really popular one as well. But Ultima, I think, is a really good choice. Story-related NPCs will be available for Trust Dungeons in 3.0 and 3.x. Oh, that's really cool. So like Emmerich and Lucia and NPCs like that, or you know, Alphino, Alice. Okay, that's good to know. People were asking about that. On PvP, I'm actually very excited for 6.1 PvP. I'm looking at Frontlines feels many players who want to do PvP, but in the Feast there is a heavier responsibility on healers and other roles. Also, you have to put some time into getting better, and then as you try to do better, you'd be beaten many times. Nowadays, when people have limited time to play each day, the mental stress of such a game mode doesn't fit well like with 14, where there's too many other things to do. Yeah, but I mean, if it's better, then people will choose to spend their time that way. So I don't entirely disagree, but I don't entirely agree. He thinks allocating time for PvP is a difficult choice. On the other hand, there are many players who do play PvP each day. Our answer was the development team's way of approaching PvP is bad. I'm glad they said it, because we've been saying it enough. I'm glad they said it, okay? We attached importance to lowering the threshold for entry and reducing the weight of responsibility. Crystal conflict is 5v5, but killing or being killed isn't the basic rule of battle. Also, in this PvP update, every job will have a means of healing. The balance is such that one person can both heal and attack. Of course, healers have their characteristic healing abilities. Okay, so when we last spoke about PvP, they said that everyone would have similar abilities, but each job would have its own limit break. What it sounded like is every job would have a pool of abilities that all achieve the exact same thing or the exact same abilities, and the only difference between them would be their limit break. This is not removing that fear of it going that way, but him talking about them having characteristic healing abilities makes it sound like there are still elements of every job and every role that are not exactly the same as everyone else. So that's actually a good thing to hear. I'm glad that they put that in here. The matches of the new mode will last around 5 minutes. That's actually really good. If victory is not achieved within that time, the match will enter sudden death. At release, there will be 3 maps, one with no gimmicks, one with a volcanic zone with lava falling from the sky, and one with winds and getting caught up in a storm. Great. I'm glad they're launching with 3 maps and not 1. It's also been a downside of the types of games they've done. They are not conducive to only 1 map. Even though other PvP games do it, for some reason, 14 never felt good only having 1 map to play a PvP mode. But it's probably because of the way they've released it. Like, they've deleted old PvP maps when they release new PvP maps, and I've always hated that as well. Please don't do that anymore. Stop deleting maps that do the same thing for the same game mode. If they have flaws, if they have downsides, fine. People will learn to play around them. It's just don't take things out if you already put so much work into them. It hasn't been decided if the Feast will return. I mean, exactly like that. At least turn those Feast maps into Crystal Conflict maps. Like, change them fundamentally so that we have more options, more availability. He acknowledges player feedback calling for the mode's retention, but says that the PvP changes, he's worried about the balance. Yeah, I get it, but I think Crystal Conflict will be the competitive mode, but just don't waste the resources. You have the resources already built. Just move them around a little bit. If after the new mode is implemented, people still want the Feast back, the chance isn't 0, but the goal for now is to increase the PvP player base, and the Feast is not part of that plan. These updates will apply to all PvP modes. However, because of that, Rival Wings will be suspended until 6.2. Interesting. Interviewer asked if this means if healers won't be necessary, which Yoshida confirms the new mode is designed so there are no role requirements. He also explains that Crystal Conflict is about pushing the crystal towers in the center of the map to win. So while incapacitating the enemy team is important, this doesn't directly lead to winning or losing. The playstyle is close to a game about capturing territory. There are also shortcuts for the losing team. Okay, so yeah, so we know we mentioned earlier there would be no role requirements. And I mean a previous live letter. So that's not all that surprising, but for it to be to such an extreme that they don't think Rival Wings can function, that's surprising. So I almost wish they'd leave it, let us try it en masse, not their private QA team, and then do something afterwards. Again, taking things out because they don't work the right way anymore. If you have concerns about them, kind of isolate them so you can get a wider array of data, because the way players play the game and the volume of players who play the game will give you more information than you'll ever determine on the back end. Ever. That's just, it happens with every game. So some of these approaches still don't feel like they fully understand what people want out of PvP, but that they're trying to get it to a point where it's not stagnant. So then they can figure out all the rest. And I don't know, playing catch up in something like this is, it's tough. It's not something that is intuitively going to improve. Oh, we're almost at the bottom here. Going to intuitively ensure that the mode improves over time. So we'll see. Regarding the PvP reward system, he will explain this in more detail in the live letter, but the rewards will be 2 types for Crystal Conflict and PvP in general. Yeah, seasons are going to be Crystal Conflict. Those are like the feast seasons we had in the past, and series are like a battle pass that's built into the game. You don't have to buy a premium battle pass. At least you better not have to. I'll be pissed if you have to as well. But you just, for playing PvP, you earn rewards over time. And for anyone who's missed it, if you miss a seasons or if you miss a series reward, it doesn't matter. When you go throughout a series, you get a currency, and you can use that currency to buy old rewards. So if there was a reward in series 1 that you wanted, and you started playing 14 in series 14, you could use the currency from series 14 to buy the series 1 rewards. Again, this is not real money. This is all just earned from playing PvP throughout the game. So there's no fear of missing out, is what I'm trying to explain. On data center travel, the greatest benefit will being able to move to another data center to find parties. This will also be benefits for role-playing, housing, and so on. Yeah. And then the last thing here is Yoshida says he's not the one who decides on casting for voice actors. Yeah, why would he? He feels it's more appropriate for people who write the story. I'm honest. Okay, well, writing the story, yeah, they would definitely have a role. But yeah, I would never expect the producer or director to be in charge of that. You're not an expert on that thing in particular. So this is, he never attended voice record. Okay, I am surprised he's never attended any of them. But I guess the fear is that as the producer or director, if he doesn't like it, that maybe he'd like overreach over the people who are in charge. Yeah, you know what? That's fine. His interpretation of the story and characters influence the actors more than the story writers. Rin's voice actress, Ichinose Kana, among others, gives suggestions for actors that could play new NPCs and are very particular about the casting. Matsuoko Yoshitsugu, voice of Kirito and many other famous roles in anime, who performed, I think I know who this is, Hermes in Endwalker, is an enthusiastic 14 player, and he made clear he wanted to appear in the game. So unusually, the development team went to Matsuoka and requested he perform. Okay, and those are all of the questions and answers. Well, I guess it's a summary of the translations that came from those various sources, Famitsu, Game Watch, and 4Gamer. Thank you again to MKillerB for the translations you have posted here on Reddit. Everyone go to the link in the description and give them your thanks in the comment section on the Reddit page, or give them Reddit karma or whatever else makes you happy. Anyway, with that, I'm going to wrap up this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And if you're going to be awake at 4 a.m. Pacific, I will actually be live from 3 a.m. Pacific all the way through the live letter. We'll do a live letter summary. That'll get posted on YouTube. And then we have State of the Realm later that day to go over more in-depth thoughts on all of those revelations. We're hoping for an April 12th release date, because that would mean next week's State of the Realm and patch note stuff. The following week would be first impressions and guides. And we are back in it. Let's go. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.